Over the years, I've made quite a few videos. These actually aren't even all of them, these are just the most recent ones. And some of my more popular videos are the trashbot builds, where I make a robot out of trash and recycled goods. For today's video, instead of making it out of trash, I'm going to make it out of a trash can. I found this trash can in the dollhouse section at my craft store. So it was with all of the fun dollhouse miniatures like the little beds and couches and furniture and dinnerware, and then this random metal trash can. Originally, I picked it up because I thought it was pretty cute, but then recently I was looking at it and decided I wanted to make a robot with it. I'm going to start by making the legs for this guy, and I really like the boots off of this cheap dollar store action figure, and they're molded in place, but they look great, so I'm going to cut them off of this guy, which is going to be a little gruesome for him, so I'm going to turn his head around so he doesn't see anything. Now, let's get to cutting those feet off. Sorry, bud. So after Lieutenant Dan here has been defeatified, I have some nice boots to work with. The legs themselves are going to be pretty stubby. Originally, I had sort of designed longer legs, but it looked a little weird with these long legs and very rotund, round body. So I ended up shortening the legs significantly, so they are probably some of the shortest legs I've made. The legs themselves are only made out of a few pieces. I have that connector set piece, a pin, the end of that bead that I showed off earlier, and then, of course, Lieutenant Dan's boots. The reason I'm using like human boots instead of robot feet is because I think the boots look fun, and it's almost like someone threw away an old pair of boots and now this robot is using them. Also, if you know me, you know that I don't like making robot feet. So, if I don't have to, I won't. The arms are a bit longer and a bit more complicated than the legs, and the base here is made out of a tube that I believe is a tube from a submersible toy that I've slowly been cannibalizing for the last year or so for parts. And as usual, to hold everything together, I'm going to be using some pins and a bit of EVA foam to fill in the space. That little bead there is going to be the wrist joint, and then this wooden bead with a hole drilled through it is the elbow joint. This arm design is a design I've used on quite a few bots in the past. It's very simple and quick to make. It's just basically two tubes held together by beads as the joints. The cool thing about this design is you can use it as is, or you can build from it and add armor plating or other designs on top of it to make it more complicated. Or like I'm doing here, you just leave it as is and add a few small details like these beads to fill in the holes. For the hands, I'm also keeping it simple and just using Gundam hands as they're the right size, and you can buy an entire box of just Gundam hands. The eyes on this guy are made up of a couple of wooden beads glued together, and for the pupils, I'm using some black sprues cut up into small lengths. Sprues are the cage that holds together model kits when you get them. At this point, I drill a few holes in the side, which was a little difficult as this thing is metal. And now I'm going to work on the trash on the inside. I cut out a circle of styrene to fit on top of the trash can lid so that I can add trash on top without having to fill up the entire thing. I'll use milliput as sort of a space filler so that the trash doesn't just look like it's a bunch of pieces of trash sitting on top of a flat surface. It looks like it's full of less detailed trash. And all of the trash that I'm using in this build are just pieces of plastic and cutoffs that have slowly migrated their way to the bottom of my Greeblies box. And now they get their chance to shine as pieces of modeled trash. So, you know, it's one level up from trash. It's modeled trash, so it's better. I do a quick test fit with the lid to make sure everything actually fits. And then I can use some very thin super glue to lock down all the parts just to make sure that they don't come unstuck. I am going to keep the eyes separate to make them easier to paint. I also make a little metal pipe out of some very small metal pipes. All of the main parts are built and now it's just ready for paint, so I add them to some paint sticks and send them outside for a coat of primer. The airbrushing on this is very simple. I'm starting with this olive drab for the boots, as that seemed fitting for the military style boots these are, and the rest gets this gunmetal metallic. I just used the white primer for the eyes here, and now I can add in the pupils and glue them in place. And that's really all I'm doing for the eyes. They're just white and black. It's pretty simple. I really didn't have much of a plan when it came to painting the trash, so I'm using these contrast paints to add a bit of color. Unfortunately, all of these different colors just sort of bled together into a purpley brown, which is fine because I was mostly just using it as a base color, and I'll be dry brushing on this trashy, sickly green color, which is actually two different layers of green, a darker green and a lighter green. To darken these boots up and to add a bit of contrast, I'm using some contrast paint in this dark leather color. Then I can move on to the weathering process, where a lot of the color and character of this bot actually come out. And I'm going to start with a generic wash, which I do for almost every one of my builds. This is a nice way just to add a generic wash of weathering over everything and start the process. Speaking of the weathering process, I think it's a great time to give a shout out to all my patrons over on my Patreon. Thank you all so very much for the support. I really do appreciate it. Your support on Patreon not only helps me buy materials, but it also motivates me to continue making these videos on a weekly basis. Seriously, thank you guys so much for the support. If you would like to join these wonderful people, you too can join the Patreon. I'll have links to the end of this video on my page and in the description. And if you are enjoying this video, as always, I'm going to shamelessly ask you to please like, comment, subscribe. I've got a whole bunch of other videos on my channel, as you saw in the beginning. So if any of those piqued your interest, please go check those out after you're done with this video. At this point in the weathering process, I'm in the rusting process, which I love adding rust, but I oftentimes overdo it. And in this case, I went a little too far on the rusting and I lost a lot of that original gunmetal silver. I went back in afterwards and did a bit of dry brushing with the original gunmetal color to try to bring it back, but I think it would have looked better to just not go as hard as I did on the rusting process. Another way to keep the weathering from darkening everything too much is by starting with a lighter color. The gunmetal color I use is already a pretty dark metallic color, so if I had started with an aluminum or a bright steel, then the weathering on top of it would have darkened it, but then it would have looked still brighter because it started brighter. You know? Either way, what's done is done. It doesn't look too bad, and hindsight is 20/20. One of my favorite weathering techniques is adding these water streaks of grime and rust. I think it adds a lot of realism and detail. And I focus on the low points as that's where this grime and rust would accumulate. I clear coat all of those parts to protect my paint job, and then I can start working on the base. I'm making a pretty small base here because this bot is pretty small and I didn't want to use one of my larger bases on this. It's just some scrap wood and some foam core covered with Mod Podge, and then to bring out some detail, I'm going to do a very similar technique to what I did in the top. This time I'm using a faster cure epoxy putty just to keep this project moving, and I'm just using, again, the same process of sticking random pieces to it to make a junkyard. Because I'm using a fast cure epoxy, I have to move much quicker, but the plus side is it cures in like 15 minutes and I can move on to painting. It gets a coat of black primer and then a dusting of white, and then I do the same technique on the top, but this time I'm a bit better at separating the colors so they don't bleed as much together. If this were a higher end base for a larger scale model or something I was selling or putting into a competition, I may have gone in and painted each individual piece something so that you could see it. But in this case, it all sort of is supposed to just blend together and look like a pile of junk. And I actually really like how this paint job turned out. I think it looks almost like a comic book background, which looks pretty cool to me. We are now in the home stretch here, and all I have to do is just assemble everything together. You can see all of that rust and grime layer I added. It looks good, but it almost made everything look like bronze instead of the original silver that I painted it. So I do go back in a bit and do a bit of dry brushing to bring back that silver a small amount. And I'm just now realizing that this trash can robot is basically just Oscar the Grouch from Sesame Street. I mean, it's the same green color in the trash can. I didn't mean that to be a thing, but happy accidents, I guess. Thank you all so much for sticking around till the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that one. It was definitely fun to build my first trash can bot. This was a nice one for me because the body was already built and I just had to add some arms and legs to it and then fill it with trash. Also, I got to use all of those tiny little bits that keep on floating around in the bottom of my bits box. So that was nice. Anyhow, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them down in the comment section and I will try to get back to you. I do read every single comment and I try to respond if I can. If you have some time, check out all the other videos on my channel. I've got quite a few. And if you like this one, I almost guarantee it that you'll like at least a few others on my channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.